This is the third of 4 Vanderbilt Mellon Partners videos walking through how to create a digital exhibition in Omeka. In this video, we're going to talk about uploading collection items to the Amazon cloud and creating metadata for each collection item. This first step is only going to be relevant if your collection items, each individual collection item or some collection items have more than one image associated with them. For example, if you've taken images of a book or some files, again, where multiple image corresponds to one collection item and you want all those images to be connected to the same item in Omeka, then what we're going to do, rather than upload each of the individual JPEGs, is first combine the JPEGs into a single PDF. So there are a couple of different ways to do this. Again, something like Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Acrobat works perfectly, but also is expensive. There are a number of free applications that you can download to do this, but most of them just have a free trial and then require some payment, although much less than Adobe Acrobat. One of those tools is linked to in the text guide, but what we're actually going to use for the purpose of this exercise is just a free web tool that will combine JPEGs into PDFs. The only reason why that's not a 100% solution is a lot of the web tools have an upper limit of how many images you can combine at once, which could be prohibitive if you have a long book. But in this case, since we only have 5 images, that won't be a problem. So we've got our JPEGs here. We're going to open up our browser, go to this online tool. Again, it's just a drag and drop. I'm going to select them all, drop them in. One thing to notice is that this little web interface didn't actually order the items correctly, so unfortunately we're going to have to do that manually. Again, that could be a pretty big challenge if you have a longer book, and that might be one reason why it could be worth actually paying for an Acrobat license, because Acrobat does order them correctly. But I haven't comprehensively explored the free tools available online, so some of them may do that as well. But in this case, we manually reordered them. They're in the right order. The default settings are fine. We're going to create the PDF. It will take a minute. Now we've got our PDF. I'm going to download it. And once it's finished downloading, we're going to grab it from the downloads folder and just stick it back in the JPEG, now incorrectly named JPEG folder. So once you've made PDFs out of all your JPEGs that you need to make PDFs out of, like the NES before, there's no real reason to keep them. So I am going to go ahead and delete them. If for whatever reason you want to keep your JPEGs, again, obviously you can do that, and since they're smaller files, they're less burdensome to keep than the raw files. Alright, so we've got our JPEGs, and we've got our archival TIFFs. So the next thing that we're going to do is upload all of these files to the cloud. So if you're part of the Mellon Partners community, you will have access to Amazon S3 storage. Once you've logged into the Amazon AWS web portal, you're going to click, you'll see a screen like this. You'll click on the little box button, then you should see a specific project. That's the Digital Humanities Center's project, just a little alphabetic string that ends in DHC. We're going to click on that. Note here that you can do everything that we're going to do in AWS using the command line, if that's something you're familiar with or interested in learning. But for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to use the graphical user interface, the management console. So we'll click into that. Once you get signed in, it's going to look like you have access to all kinds of things. You actually don't. And really the only thing, so you can't break anything, but the only thing that we're interested in is the S3. So we're just going to type literally the letter S, the digit 3, into the search box. The very first result will be S3 storage. I'm going to click into that. Once it loads up, you will have a bucket that's been assigned to you as a Mellon partner or as a Vanderbilt affiliate. For the purpose of this exercise, we're just going to use a test bucket right here. And buckets you can think of as folders where you store stuff. So this is another easy interface. We've got an empty bucket up here. We're going to grab our PDF. I'm going to drop it on in. The upload will take a second because that PDF is not super tiny, but as you can see, it's not going to take that long. And then similarly, we are just going to grab the TIFFs, select them all, and drop them in. These buckets, once you get a bucket, they should be public by default. If there is some specific item or items in your collection that you don't want to be public, you can configure those settings even more granularly. But for files that you want to upload into Omeka, to ingest into Omeka using the workflow that we're going to use in the next video, they will need to be public. And the reason, at least while you're doing the upload, they'll need to be public. And the reason why they'll need to be public is, as we'll see in a second, when you upload a file into a public S3 bucket, it is actually immediately accessible on the internet through a URL that you can find in the S3 interface. So once all these files are done uploading, we're going to actually grab the public-facing URL for our PDF, which is what we're going to ultimately ingest into Omeka in just a minute. So just about done here. The second this upload finishes, which it just did, we're going to look at our PDF, look at the object. So you can see here there's actually an object URL. If we follow that link, we are right at a publicly accessible version of the PDF we made. I'm going to go ahead and grab that URL because we're going to use it later in our metadata, which is the next step of this exercise. So the metadata that we recommend as a best practice for this project is the metadata schema is Dublin Core, which many of you may be familiar with. It's a pretty simple metadata standard that's used fairly widely in libraries and archives. The reason in particular that we're using it for this project is that Omeka is built on top of Dublin Core. So as we'll see in a few minutes, Dublin Core metadata is very easy to import into Omeka. The way that we're going to build this metadata is actually by using a Google form. The Google form that I'm going to show here is available through the text version of this guide, and I will also link to it directly in the comments section below this video on YouTube. The one thing that I'll ask if you decide to use this form for your project is, rather than actually working with the copy of the form that is linked to, when you open that form up, click on the three dots, click on Make a Copy, and move that copy to somewhere on your personal Google Drive or your institution's Google Drive, and that will be a personal copy of the form for you. So I'm just going to stick it in a folder here. So it'll take a minute to make a copy. Alright, so now we've got our own personal copy of the Dublin Core form. This version of the form is the simplest possible version. It literally just lists out the 15 fields that are part of the Dublin Core schema, as well as these two extra fields on the end, tags. Tags are exactly what they sound like and what you may be useful to from other, internet browsing use cases. They allow you to assign specific tags to various items in your collection that makes it easier for users to see which items might be related in some way. And then the last field here are the actual files, and those are the paths to the files. So that is, when we grabbed that URL on Amazon S3 just a minute ago, that's what we're going to put here. So you're going to fill out this form for each individual item in your collection, whether that's a single image or a series of images that you made into a PDF that correspond to a compound object like a book. The only fields that are mandatory for each individual collection item are the ones that are starred in this form, and that's, title. Obviously, you want your object to have a title. Identifier, that's actually a unique identifier, can be, any kind of alphanumeric code. It should be unique to each item in your Omeka exhibition. I would recommend, some kind of descriptive prefix either for the project as a whole or specific collections within your project, followed by, again, a padded integer that you just, increment one at a time to make sure that it's unique. And the last field that's mandatory, again, is this files field down here, so that when we ingest into Omeka, Omeka knows where to look to find the actual images of the object. There are several other fields in this form that I highly recommend. I think it's really useful to have a description of the item. I think subject can be useful. You could also kind of mirror what you put in subject in the tags field. Again, that's a good way to help your users find collection items that are similar to the item they may have landed on first. Date can obviously be quite useful. There are other fields here like publisher. You could give credit to your project as a whole. Contributor, you could give credit to the individual, or individual is responsible for a given item. Language could be useful if you have multiple different languages represented. And then finally this write statement here, if there's a specific Creative Commons license or something like that associated with your collection items, this would be a good place to put that in. So the view of the form we're actually looking at right now is where we would go if we wanted to edit the form itself, not where we would go if we wanted to actually fill out the form. We are going to do one thing, however, before we move to fill out the form, and that is we're going to click from questions over to responses. And we're going to click this little green button here. And what this green button is going to do is it's going to create a spreadsheet that's linked to the form. And the reason why we're doing that, you see it's empty now, but it won't be in a minute once we fill out the form. But the reason why we're doing that is because this spreadsheet is actually what we're ultimately going to use to ingest our metadata into Omeka. Again, many of you may already know this, but spreadsheets are really just comma-separated values files. They're literally just pieces of text separated by commas. So if I open up a text editor and type in text separated by commas, that right there is a CSV file. And if we save it as a CSV file, and then we open that file up, you can see Excel will open it up automatically and it will open it up as a spreadsheet. So CSVs are just spreadsheets and spreadsheets are just CSVs, which is really useful for our purposes because what we are going to use to ingest into Omeka is actually a CSV, and we'll be able to download the spreadsheet that we make using the Google form as a CSV. So once you've got that all set up, then now comes the actual fun part. We actually get to build the metadata for our collection items. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. If there are, research assistants whose job it is to build the metadata, you can send this form to them and they'll just be able to access it as a fillable form. If you personally are the one who's responsible for filling out the metadata, we can just go to our copy of the form, click this little eye icon, and now we have a version of the form that we can fill out. So again, I recommend building good comprehensive metadata. Omeka may not be the presentation layer of choice in 5 or 10 years, but if you have good metadata and if you have good data, so if your images themselves are good and the metadata that you built to those images, you'll really easily be able to upload your collection into whatever the presentation layer of choice is in 5 or 10 years. So if you come away from this project with anything at all, it should be good data and good metadata. All that being said, since we're just kind of demoing the workflow here, I'm going to build some really quick basic metadata. So going to give it kind of a placeholder title, going to give it a pretty basic placeholder identifier. And then a few minutes ago, we grabbed the URL of our object on S3. It should still be on the clipboard, so we're just going to paste it in. So again, we've got the bare minimum here. We've got a title, we've got an identifier, and we've got a file. We're going to go ahead and submit that. And you see now, if we go back and look at our spreadsheet, we've got that first row. If you've done this once and you're going through this whole process a second time, remember when you get to the step that we're about to do, when we're actually going to download the CSV, if you've used this Google form to make metadata before and ingested objects into Islandora before, into Omeka before, there may be, or there will be, a bunch of rows in the spreadsheet that pertain to items you've already ingested. If that's the case, remember to delete the old rows and only keep the new rows before you download the spreadsheet. You can do that pretty easily. Just select the row or rows, right-click, hit delete rows. However, we actually want that row, so we're going to bring it back. We're going to undo with Control-Z. So we've got our row again. So the last thing we're going to do in this part of the video guide is click File, click Download. Download as CSV. Remember where that CSV is downloading to. And then you're done. So at this point, we've got our images. All of our object data is stored on the Amazon cloud. We've got the metadata for all our items downloaded as a CSV. So the only thing left to do is to actually build our Omeka instances and ingest our objects into Omeka. And that is what we will do in the fourth and final video in this series. So talk to you then.